So started recording now, and I'm just going to start off by introducing our coordinator, Lucy Duncan, to say a few words about the group.
Hi, so I'm Lucy. I'm one of the coordinators for Brent Friends of the Earth. We work in partnership with the National Friends of the Earth. We work with the council and get together on a monthly basis to discuss current campaigns and new events. During lockdown, we've been getting together via Zoom remotely, and we're looking forward to getting back to meeting each other in person once the restrictions ease. You can find out more about us at www.brentfoe.com, and we welcome new members from all different backgrounds, different ethnicities, male or female, whoever wants to support the group's aims. I'm now going to hand over to Ian, who is also a member of Brent Friends of the Earth.
Thanks, Lucy, and thanks everybody. Thank you all for attending. I see at the moment we have 25 attendees. So thanks for coming to this this Zoom hustings. Bear with us because we've not done this sort of thing before. We've had lots of Zoom meetings, but this is the first Zoom webinar type event, and it's slightly different. So if things go a little bit wrong, I'm sorry about that. We'll be, as I've said, we are recording this event. We've had quite a lot of questions come in advance. If you would like to put a question during the course of the evening, if you could put it in the chat, and we may be able to feed it through. Hashi may put it to the panelists, to the candidates. Can I just say, if you could, there isn't a facility for you to chat to one another here on this. So if you could if you want to put a question to the panelists, put it in the chat. There's something else I was going to say, but I've forgotten what it was. Yes, so the other first thing that we want to do is to, with the number of attendees here, I don't know that it makes much difference, but I'm going to put up a poll for you to vote at the beginning on how you intend at the moment to vote in the coming GLA and mayoral election, assuming that you'll vote the same way in both, which most people will. So I'm going to launch the poll, and you should see it up in front of you now. So if you could vote, the candidates are not enabled to vote in this. So okay, have we had time for everybody to vote? I think so.
Ian, there's a few more people who haven't voted, but they might not want to.
Yeah, I'll give you another minute or so to vote.
Oh, everybody, I think everybody's now voted.
I think,
oh, no, not quite, sorry.
We're not counting, right. Yeah, the 24 out of 28 includes us and the panelists. So, oh no, sorry, 24 out of 28 have voted. 85% of people have voted. So I'm going to end the poll there, and the results should be shared on your screen now. So as you can see, 54% of those present are thinking of voting Labour. Quite close behind on 46% are the Greens, and Lib Dems and Conservatives both on 4%. So once we've been through this process, we'll see how people, or if people, change their voting intentions at the end. So I'll stop sharing now and we'll leave that there. And I'll hand over to Hashi now.
Thank you very much, Ian and Lucy and Elaine and everybody who's organised this hustings this evening. Good evening, everyone. My name is Hashi Mohammed. I'm a barrister and a broadcaster, and I live in Brent in Wembley. And it's a great pleasure for me this evening to host this hustings that hopefully may have an impact to how you vote. And again, welcome to the joint Brent Friends of the Earth and the London Assembly candidates who are here to explain all manner of issues, in particular how they're going to tackle the climate crisis. The vote, as a reminder, is obviously the May the 6th. So hopefully you will all have had your polling cards or indication that you have already registered. Participating in your local democracy is, of course, quite important. Tonight we have the Green Party candidate, Emma Wallace. We have the Labour candidate, Councillor Krupa Shirani, and the Liberal Democrat candidate, Councillor Anton Giorgio. We did invite the Conservative candidate, and but despite our best efforts in making her aware of tonight, we did not get a response for weeks on end. And only last night did we get word from Molly Samuel Laporte MBE that this evening's hustings was too short notice for her and that she was unable to participate in today's session. So a disappointment for those 4% of you who indicated that you'd be voting Conservative at the start of this. So hopefully by the end of this, maybe it will be an interesting thing to see if that percentage goes up or down, which will tell us whether Molly's attendance was ever needed at all. So thank you very much. What we're going to do now, the format is quite straightforward. I will begin by allowing the candidates to open their sort of stall, as it were, and they each get 6 minutes to say their bit on the issues that we're discussing today on this hustings. When each of them have spoken for 6 minutes, I will then open it up and ask them questions based on a number of questions that we've already received from you all. And Ian had already sent that to me earlier today, so I will pick up those questions after those opening remarks. And then I'm hoping to then take an opportunity to get some additional questions from your audience, us here joined, and so you will be able to put the answers, the questions into the Q&A function. So please feel free to put them in as the evening goes, and then hopefully by the end of it, we will also have another poll to see if anything has shifted. At the moment, it would seem that it was either 54% Labour, 46%, and Anton has a lot of work to do for his case. So, right. Earlier on, before we joined you, we took some random lots, and Anton won and has the opportunity to go first. I'll introduce Anton Giorgio, Councillor Anton Giorgio, who's a local resident, local activist, lives in Brent, has lived in Brent in his whole life, and it was elected last January in the Alperton ward. And he is the only Liberal Democrat candidate in Brent. Anton, you have 6 minutes to set out your stall, and Elaine is going to time you. Over to you.
Well, thank you very much. It looks like I've got some work to do tonight, but hopefully I'll be able to pull off a similar swing that I achieved in Alperton last year and get an increase in the Lib Dem vote here tonight as well. So firstly, thanks to Brent Friends of the Earth for arranging this Zoom. Whilst it would have been really nice to do this in person, it's nice nonetheless to see you all and to be with fellow candidates. So I look forward to this debate, Emma and Krupesh. Before I start, I just wanted to say I hope you're all well. It's been such a tough year, but the resolve and compassion so many in our community have shown has once again highlighted why I'm so proud to live and represent this borough. So my name's Anton. I'm the Liberal Democrat candidate for the Brent and Harrow GLA seat, but first and foremost, I'm an environmentalist. I believe passionately in the need to address the huge environmental challenges we are facing here in Brent and Harrow, across London, and indeed around the world. It's an issue that should unite all people, an issue that has no borders or room for interpretation. The science is clear. Unless and until we drastically focus on environmental issues, cleaning our air, reducing pollution and our carbon footprints, every one of us will suffer in the near future. The severity of the impact felt will, of course, as ever, be more pronounced on the most vulnerable. There is no getting away from the fact that the environmental debate is universal and requires collective working by all of us if we're going to resolve it. I hope that the other panelists won't mind me saying, but I'm probably the youngest candidate on this call. And I, like many of my peers, feel totally let down by politicians of all persuasions on this issue. The Tories wanted to be the most green government we've ever had. Clearly that didn't materialise. The current Labour Mayor of London has, as is often the case, severely underperformed on dealing with London's toxic air crisis. Planted less than 200,000 of the 2 million trees he promised in 2016, and has only managed to increase recycling rates across London by a measly 1%. We cannot afford more of this underperformance. Talking will not do anymore. I'm proud that the Liberal Democrat candidate for Mayor, Louisa Porritt, has put forward an ambitious and green plan to address the climate emergency we face. Her plan for London revolves around creating the new green jobs we need, building homes for our future, and importantly, cleaning the air that we breathe. Having clean air to breathe is a right. The Liberal Democrats have a plan to clean up our air with strong action to make our transport system green and to rewild our capital. We'll scrap the polluting £2 billion Silvertown Road tunnel project. At a time when we want to see less cars polluting our roads, this would be a total waste of money and set us even further backwards. We'd introduce a smart and fair pay-as-you-go road pricing system. We'd invest in green transport, from new and improved cycle routes to extended tube lines. We'd make every single one of London's buses zero emissions, and we'd rewild London with green roads and green walks. As for me, I'm the only elected Liberal Democrat councillor in Brent. I represent Alperton Ward after winning my seat from Labour last January. Over the past year, I've worked hard to represent residents in Alperton, but also to scrutinise decisions being made by the Labour administration here in Brent. It's clear that there is a lot more that could be done from a local authority perspective to address the climate issues we face. Declaring a climate emergency is not enough. Unfortunately, I've picked up on a lack of political will in Brent Council to truly get to grips with the crisis we face. For example, prior to the low traffic neighbourhood schemes that were introduced, very little planning had gone into policies that would actually build on the declaration of a climate emergency. We have some of the most polluted roads in London in our area, the North Circular being one of the most prominent examples. But what plans did the council have in place? According to one officer I spoke to last year on this very issue, Brent were behind other neighbouring boroughs. I'm also concerned about the lack of care and attention given to the most prominent green open spaces within our area. The catastrophic situation in the Welsh Harp has built up over many, many years. Yet to date, there has been a very slow response on dealing with it, and that is really very alarming. Similarly, in my own ward, the lack of collective working on issues around the Grand Union Canal or improving and maintaining cycle routes, like for example on the Harrow Road, all speak to the lacklustre green credentials of Brent Council. Now, if elected, I'd be a champion on green issues. I'd continue to stand up to the powers that be, to demand better and to demand more. There is no time to waste. If we are truly to deal with the climate emergency we face, we need elected representatives that actually want to see it resolved. And I pledge to be that kind of assembly member. If you give all 3 votes to the Liberal Democrats on the 6th of May, you're voting to take London forward, and you'll get a mayor and assembly members who will put green issues at the heart of all that we do. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Anton, and for sticking to the time. Really, really appreciated. Our next speaker is Emma. Emma, who's the candidate for the Green Party. Emma Wallace is a local campaigner and environmentalist who's been based in Harrow for over 10 years. In her day job, she's a professional librarian working in education and who is passionate about protecting our local services. Emma, the ground is and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So as just said, I am the Green Party candidate for Brent and Harrow. I'd like to start with saying thank you so much to Brent Friends of the Earth for arranging this hustings and providing us an opportunity to answer questions on the most urgent issue that we are all currently facing, the climate and ecological emergency, and how we can mitigate the worst effects of this. I have long been involved in campaigning on environmental issues, with my parents both being members of Watford Friends of the Earth when I was younger. During the 80s and 90s, I was involved in many protests with them, including campaigning against local ring roads being built, against airport expansions, and also against the destruction of precious forests and rainforests, and they're being cut down. I have continued this activism since moving to Harrow over the last 10 years, where I have been involved in campaigning on many issues in my local community and across wider London. I have led on environmental campaigns, including successfully lobbying to save mature trees along the new Harrow Kodak development site and fighting against a number of planning applications that would destroy our ever-shrinking green spaces in what are already congested and overdeveloped neighbourhoods. Recently, I have been supporting residents fighting against TfL removing trackside habitat along the Metropolitan line. I set up an online petition calling on TfL to change their biodiversity policies, which was then presented to the current mayor last month. I am also part of Harrow Council's Sustainability and Climate Change Partnership and have most recently been holding Harrow Council to account over their lack of action on the climate emergency, calling on them to invest and set achievable goals so it can reach its carbon neutral target by 2030. Greens believe that London can be the greenest city in the world, and our 2 London Assembly Green Party members, Sian Berry and Caroline Russell, have made a big impact at City Hall over the last 5 years, working tirelessly towards this. They have had the current mayor and held him to his promises and pushed him to act on a wide range of issues repeatedly. This includes getting the Assembly to declare a climate emergency in 2018 and winning an extra £45 million from the mayor for youth clubs. Most recently, Sian and Caroline put an amendment to this year's mayor's budget, asking for £20 million to be spent on improving our walking infrastructure in outer London. And they also proposed a motion asking for a 20-mile-per-hour speed limit on all TfL roads with pavements. We are facing a number of interconnected emergencies, from COVID to increasing social inequality and escalating climate change. Greens believe that public spending to support the economy must prioritise new jobs for the climate and nature emergencies. As the UN Environment Programme head warned in August 2020, there is no vaccine for climate change. We must embed sustainability into COVID-19 recovery. We need bold and radical action, and I believe the Green Party has the policies needed for social, economic and environmental transformation. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Emma. Third speaker this evening is Councillor Krupesh Irani, who is the Labour and the Cooperative London Assembly candidate for Brent and Harrow. He's a charity worker supporting disabled people living and working in Brent. He's been a Brent councillor since 2010, and in particular, he has been cabinet member overseeing public health over the COVID pandemic period. And he also currently chairs the Metro Land Trust charity. Krupesh, the floor is yours for the next 6 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you for your introduction, Hashi, and great to see you again, albeit on screen. It was about a year ago, I think we met, where you signed for me a copy of your book. And I remember that being there, just talking about washing hands, and we were carrying sanitizer on the tables. It seems like a lifetime ago, given the year that everyone has had. But one thing that has become even more clear to me is the importance of living healthily, nature, the environment, and especially during my time as public health lead, lung health. We only have one planet, and we should look after it for our future generations. Ella Kissy Deborah lived 25 meters away from the South Circular Road. She died in 2013 due to the air that she breathed. I talk about Ella because it is a reminder that every day lives are being lost in London to pollution. I talk about Ella because Ella could easily be me. I live in Neasden, a stone's throw away from the North Circular Road. As I speak to you today from my family home, I am breathing some of the worst air in the whole of the country, if not London. Intergenerational housing is common in my culture and my community, and now I have my own daughter in our family home. With the ULEZ expansion introduced by Sadiq and set to come in towards the end of the year, my daughter will be growing up breathing better air than I have been breathing all of my life. Real action on climate change, real action from London Labour. I'm proud of Labour's record with Sadiq Khan as mayor and our councils who have all declared climate emergencies and continue to enact policies to address it. As we rebuild our economy after COVID-19, we need to make it clear that a stronger recovery and a green recovery are not mutually exclusive. They are one and the same. That is why, as part of our key manifesto for London, one of our key and front and centre policies is a Green New Deal. Our Green New Deal will tackle climate change on 3 fronts. 1, decarbonising the built environment. 2, green transport. And 3, green foundations to support green jobs and businesses and younger people to get into green industries. London Labour with Sadiq has already launched the first part of the Green New Deal, with £10 million invested in projects to boost green jobs, tackle pollution, and also support green industries. On decarbonising the built environment, we've already seen the involvement and the retrofitting of 37,000 homes and 272 public sector buildings, and the installation of solar panels in people's homes across Brent and Harrow. On transport, I've already touched on ULEZ, but we'll ensure that London's transport system is the world's greenest. We'll work to ensure that 80% of all journeys by 2041 are walked, cycled, or by public transport. We'll review TfL plans on a zero-emission bus fleet by 2037 and make the case to bring this forward 2030. Sadiq and the London Labour team will bring together the GLA group and use existing land and infrastructure to support the rollout of more than 44,000 EV charging points that the city will definitely need by 2030. And on green foundations, we will invest in green jobs, training and opportunities for apprenticeships, such as solar panel installers and fitters, so that young people can be trained in the industries that we need tomorrow. We are committed to making London a zero carbon city by 2030, faster than any comparable city, and City Hall has already developed a climate action plan that is compatible with the highest ambition of the Paris Agreement. From the world's first ultra-low emission zone, retrofitting public buildings and social housing with more green energy, more cycling, walking schemes, and divesting pension funds from fossil fuels, London Labour will do everything within our power to counter the climate breakdown in London. We'll continue the divestment programme and use our influence to also make others do the same as well. On May the 6th, the choice is clear. Because of the voting system we have, it is a two-horse race in the constituencies between Sadiq Khan and the Tory mayoral candidate, and between me and the Tory Brent and Harrow candidate for in our local seat. But Labour is the strongest party in London on this issue. Because of Labour in City Hall, toxic air pollution is down a third in London, and the number of state primary and secondary schools in areas which exceed the legal pollution limit has reduced by 97%. If you want a cleaner, greener London, vote for Labour on May the 6th.
Thank you very much for that, Krupesh. One of the things I'm hoping to achieve this evening is I'm not going to just sit here and ask questions and then give you guys the opportunity to just answer them for every couple of minutes, but I would like you to respond to each other as well. I mean, you know, Krupesh has made some claims, and I'm sure many of you, both Emma and Anton, will have answers and points to make about that. So please don't hesitate to do that if you wish, because the point about this is to try and give the audience here an important opportunity to engage with that. Each question I ask will give you 2 minutes to respond, and I'm going to jump straight into a question that came in through the Q&A session before I get to the ones I have in front of me, which I think is important, and it goes to the point you were just asking there, you were making there, Krupesh, which is that it says there the LTN congestion charge, the ULEZ charge coming into Brent in October, each will hurt the poorest families hardest. What will the candidates do if elected to ensure that the poor aren't hit hard? I'll come straight back to you, Krupesh, on that. You've got 2 minutes.
On that, there is quite a generous scheme which probably isn't as well known as people would know. So there's a scheme where people can have subsidise and contributions towards getting a new vehicle or giving up their car and have that money put towards public transport. There are qualifying benefits which include pension credit, but also universal credit for those who are out of work, and for those who are receiving supplement in income because of affordability. So there are schemes already there that the mayor will also boost. And in addition,
where do people go to find out about these schemes? How do they apply to them? Where's the information?
So there is a page with all the information clearly laid out on the london.gov.uk website. So the support is there for those who are unable to afford switching vehicles or switching to give up their vehicle.
Okay, thank you. Anton, do you want to say something on that?
Absolutely. Well, I don't think that goes far enough. I spoke in my first, in my introductory remarks about Louisa Porritt's plans for road charging, which would be a flat rate, which would, when you talk about having a direct negative impact on particularly the poorest and the most economically challenged, Louisa Porritt's plan is a lot fairer, and it would be, and is a lot more ambitious. What I would like to do at this point, if I may, is just come back on Krupesh's point regarding the fact that voting Labour in May is the most green thing that people can do. Could I ask directly what Krupesh says or what he believes regarding the £2 billion that the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, is seeking to spend on the Silvertown Tunnel, and at a point when we're discussing how big an issue the climate emergency is, why is that a priority for the Labour Mayor of London?
Krupesh.
So London Labour and Sadiq are doing everything in their power to address the climate emergency. Tackling congestion obviously is a key part of that. The new Silvertown Tunnel will improve traffic conditions, effectively eliminating the current congestion at the Blackwall Tunnel. So I think it's worth looking at these proposals not in isolation because of the poor pollution that is there. The introduction of user charging also across both tunnels will make sure there's no overall increase in traffic and that the scheme delivers on improving air quality. But both tunnels and the surrounding areas will also fall within the expanded ULEZ zone, which will in general improve air quality all across London, ahead of the tunnels actually even opening.
Okay, going to Emma. Emma, do you have any comments on these schemes that are being offered here, whether it's the ULEZ, the congestion charge that's coming forward? And I want to come back to Anton about this flat charge that he's saying. Do you think that the Mayor of London is not going far enough, and how much further would you go?
I completely agree that if Labour is serious about addressing the climate emergency, they cannot be building new roads, and the Silvertown Tunnel is going to be over £2 billion of money which could be invested in our public transport, improving cycle networks, improving pedestrian and our pavements for people to walk. So it's just a really nonsensical argument to be building and investing in this really polluting tunnel at this time.
It's easy to beat on the Labour candidates though, but what would you do though? What do you propose?
Sure. So we have proposals to make public transport more affordable in London. So Sian Berry, our Green Party mayoral candidate, she has proposed that we will have a single flat fare for the whole of TfL London Underground. So there will be no zoning, just as we have for buses, to make it fairer and more equitable for people to travel from outer zones to central London. And we also have proposed, and we are strong advocates for universal basic income, which will mean that rather than the unfair welfare system which we currently have, there will be support for everyone, and this will help the poorest, particularly in London.
Quick question back to you on that. How would you pay for that? I mean, if you're talking about a flat rate on the TfL London Underground, we know that TfL is currently facing financial problems. We know that Sadiq is, whenever he can, going to beg the central government for money. How are you going to pay for a flat rate?
So the penalty charges for driving in London, parking in bus lanes, have not risen since 2011. So we could raise that for drivers.
But hang on. Penalty charges that are usually levied borough by borough. What powers does a mayor of London have to harness that to pay for a flat charge to travel on the tube?
I think it is a central thing, because Caroline Russell has been, our Green London Assembly candidate, has been lobbying for the penalty charges to be raised, and this would raise a lot of money. So I think it is viable. Okay,
we'll come back to, can I just go to Anton and ask you about this flat charge? We live in Brent. Brent is, as we both know, and all of us know here who live here and have lived here for a long time, it's not the richest borough in London. A lot of people here are living in some places hand to mouth. Whilst green credentials are good and we're trying to find ways of dealing with the climate emergency, I don't think anybody's suggesting there isn't a climate emergency, but suggesting that yet further charges on people who live in Brent to pay, is that really feasible for people who are really struggling to live and be able to afford to live in a place like Brent?
Well, the climate emergency is the #1 issue that we need to be grappling with over the course of the next few years. I mean, the pandemic, once we've overcome the pandemic, which hopefully that will be very soon, we do need to set all our sights on dealing with the climate emergency. So at present, London has the congestion charge, which was extended in the summer to 7 days a week, so 10 p.m, and also raised to £15 a day. In addition, there's the ULEZ, which covers the current congestion zone, but there's also the low emission zone, largely affecting lorries and vans coming into London. In time, there'll be an extension to that, obviously. And if the Silvertown Tunnel is built, there'll be road tolls at the Silvertown and Rotherhithe Tunnel as well. Instead of these charges, the argument that Louisa Porritt and the Liberal Democrats are making is that there is an argument for road charging. So charging vehicles for the distance that they travel and the pollution they create, and not merely whether they've crossed a boundary, which I think is fairer. Road charging also has the advantage over other crude congestion charges of not having adverse effects. If someone pays the congestion charge, they have an incentive at the moment to keep driving, to make the most of the fact that they've paid that congestion charge. That wouldn't be the case with the proposal that Louisa Porritt and the Liberal Democrats are putting forward. Moving towards road charging, in my view, just makes sense. It will provide a much needed long-term source of income for TfL2, which we know is in desperate need of cash. But it would also play an invaluable role, in my view, in curbing road traffic in every part of London, including in Brent and in Harrow. It would not penalise car owners, and it would merely penalise car owners who rack up the miles, who clock up huge mileage over long periods of time. So I just think that's a much more ambitious proposal. And actually, if the Labour Mayor of London and the Labour team continue to talk about the climate emergency in the way that they do, but still back building the Silvertown Tunnel and investing £2 billion in that, you know, in my view, that's totally hypocritical and doesn't make sense. You either commit to dealing with the climate emergency and put forward radical green proposals like what Louisa Porritt and the Liberal Democrats are doing with our proposal here, or you own up and say, well, actually, we're trying to do a bit of both.
Okay, thank you, Anton. I'll come back to respond for that, Krupesh, in a minute, but I'm just going to bring Emma again and just ask you, Emma, any comments on that? But particularly, I've got a question in one of the long list of questions that I have here. What do you plan to do to encourage more people to use bicycles, which are the most environmentally friendly means of transport at the moment?
There definitely needs to be proper investment, so we have a joined up network for cycling, because at the moment our cycleways, you know, end abruptly. Where I'm a cyclist, I cycle a lot in Harrow, and I find it very frustrating and difficult to cycle within the borough. I know that we have the Northwick Park developing and hoping to build 1,600 flats. We've had Brent and Harrow cyclists both putting forward suggestions for including cycle ways there, and Brent Council have basically ignored them and not included them in their development plans. So we need to do so much more, and there needs to be a shift away from building new roads such as we have currently coming from the current mayor, and actual investment in cycleways. It's so important that that happens.
Okay, and Krupesh, I'll come back to you, Anton. I'm just going to bring in Krupesh here. You were accused earlier of hypocrisy by trying to have your cake and eat it in one sense, but could I also get your thoughts on how we deal with the high transport fares of London and try and get more people to use, you know, bicycles and more sustainable forms of travel?
Yeah, so I think when it comes to transport and greener ways of travelling, it is about channel shift, which is a horrible phrase, but making
channel
sure
what?
Channel shift. So making sure that those journeys that people take on cars that they don't need to take on cars, move towards walking or public transport or cycling as well. I think, to be honest, it would be attacking current mayor's record on climate change and green issues, especially with the investment in cycling lanes, in cycling, and also on the charging for pollution and ULEZ, which is, if you look at evidence from across the globe, it's the single biggest change or policy that a mayor or a city can make to improve the air that we breathe is a bit galling, really. But I think if you look at the record that we've had on cycling, there is also a need to shift or try and convince people and change hearts and minds on this as well. The low traffic neighbourhoods probably is a good example of that, because where we try to encourage schemes, we've had arguments on both sides. Those of us that were at the Brent Council meeting on low traffic neighbourhoods may just recall that we had one group really arguing passionately for wanting LTNs and another group arguing against. Somehow we need to bring people together to make sure that it's seen as an important issue and people understand the reasons why all parties really, maybe apart from the ones that aren't here present today, are working to improve the public transport network, but also cycling and walking, and are really committed to.
But what about the fares? What about the expensive fares? What is Labour's position on that?
So that for the last 4 years, for the last 5 years, fares have obviously been frozen in London, and that was part of a key landmark pledge at the last London elections.
We're losing you there, Krupesh. Do you want to just
TfL
start that last
rises,
sentence?
which is
Start that
against,
last sentence,
London.
Krupesh. We lost you there for a second. Start that last sentence again.
Sure. So the fares have been frozen for 5 years, and the government at the moment with the TfL bailout deal is dictating what the fare should be. So we are deeply resisting. But also one thing which we shouldn't underestimate is the £1.50 fare introduced by Sadiq Khan allows unlimited journeys for £1.50. It has absolutely changed the lives of people who were paying nearly 4 times as much on their daily commute to get to work or to get to where they needed to go. On average, those fare policies have put back £200 back in people's pockets so that they can hopefully spend it elsewhere wherever they need to.
Anton, a lot of the questions, I want you to respond to all of that, but a lot of the questions in the messages is people saying that you can't expect everyone to cycle. There will be lots of people with children doing their shoppings, disabled people. So surely just cycling isn't the answer to all of this, but just any thoughts on that and any response to what you just heard?
Well, absolutely. Cycling is not the answer in itself. There are several things that need to happen in order for us to get to a point where we change the behavior of the way that we travel. Active transport is cycling, it's walking. But at the same time, this all needs to be safe. And I'll go back to a point I made in my introductory remarks. We've got cycle routes within Brent, which are currently not being maintained, not being kept safe. And actually, how can we expect to encourage people to go out onto their bikes if they don't feel safe? In the ward that I represent, for example, there's a huge amount of traffic in the Wembley area. And actually, not a lot has been done in terms of trying to deal with that and seeking to change that behavior that people have in terms of relying heavily on cars. Car ownership tends to be a lot more prominent within the Alpes and Wembley area of Brent when compared to other parts of Brent. I'd like to pick, so on cycling, we need to make sure it's safe, and local authorities have a role to play in that as well, in maintaining cycle lanes and actually getting more cycle lanes. Now, when the LTN discussion first sort of came about at towards the middle of last year, when that money was made available by central government and the encouragement was given by Sadiq Khan to get these LTNs in local communities, in my view, not enough consultation took place in that period to ensure that local residents were satisfied with the type of low traffic neighbourhoods that actually were implemented in Brent and possibly also for Harrow. Now, the point that I would make is, as a councillor, what I did, I engaged with the lead member for this particular scheme, and at the time, and it is currently Councillor Shama Tatler, I engaged directly with officers within her department, and actually what happened is we didn't get that consultation with residents early on, and that's why it resulted in November with us having to be requisitioned into an emergency council meeting to discuss the palaver that came as a consequence of, in my view, lack of consultation with local people and LTNs. Now, I believe that we need to see low traffic neighbourhoods. I also believe we need to see further pop-up cycle lanes in the borough. We also need to be encouraging cycling in the way that I believe Louisa Porritt, our candidate for mayor, just this weekend announced that what she wants to do is for the next year is have cycle Sundays where the Santander bikes that are currently available are free for people to use. And that's something that will encourage that behavioural change. We need to see people actively pursuing cycling, but it needs to be made safe. And it's not the solution to this problem. There are several things that can be done.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Krupesh, I'm going to go to Emma now. I haven't heard from Emma for a bit. Emma, just any response to that, but I wanted to ask you specifically also about what are the biggest problems that councils are facing in terms of providing sufficient public electric charging infrastructure, and what your thoughts are on that, and anything else you've just heard.
Yeah, again, electric charging points are so patchy. In Harrow, we've got hardly any. I think Brent is slightly better, but again, central investment from City Hall needs to come to councils to support these initiatives, so that we have many more points and people are encouraged to move to electric cars. The government is making sure that no petrol cars or diesel cars are sold from 2030. So we've got, you know, under 9 years really to move to actually having a proper electric car infrastructure in London and across the country. So we definitely need financial investment, and through that there will be new green jobs for people to actually work within the electric car infrastructure, which is definitely what's needed after the pandemic. And also just about the making it much safer. I fully agree with what Anton's saying here, that it needs to be safer for people to want to cycle, and also safer for pedestrians and for people who are driving. So the idea that the Green Party have is to bring 20 mph speed limit across all TfL roads with pavements. So this would make it safer for everybody driving in London.
Can I then just move on from transport now? I'm going to move on to another area which we've been getting a lot of questions on, which is recycling. And I can start with Krupesh on that. One of the things we've been talking about, and a lot of the questions that have come in, and says, generally, what would you do more to encourage recycling, particularly around flats? And how do we do more to stop the fly tipping and the litter, so that basically we get more people to respect their local environments better? And we've seen how during lockdown, people, you know, leaving a lot of their crap. I live right next to Friant Country Park, and during lockdown, a lot of people have had to come out, volunteer to pick up a lot of the rubbish, and we've had a lot of problems with that. So recycling, encouraging more people to recycle, particularly around flats, and how do you stop fly tipping? Krupesh first.
Yeah, so thank you. I know exactly what you're talking about, Hashi. So this weekend, I was out at my local Gladstone Park with litter pickers as well, following the half decent weather we had the week before, leading to lots of rubbish around parks as well. So on reduction and recycling plans, they go hand in hand also with the heating functioning of buildings as well, and the built environment. Recycling plans at the moment are just vary depending on which borough uses which system. If we're being fair, the Labour boroughs, Brent and Harrow in particular, have higher recycling rates compared to Tory or Lib Dem ones across London. And that's part of a wave of recycling and household recycling that has gone on over the last decade, really. At the moment, recycle rates vary from 33% to 40%, depending on which borough you're in. And the onus is really on us to make sure that all boroughs are achieving as high as possible on that. Certainly, I'll work with the local authorities across Brent and Harrow, who are probably one of the early adopters when it comes to introducing household recycling. On fly tipping, the onus is more about enforcement, really. And we've seen Brent in particular has one of the highest enforcement rates on fly tipping, but it continues to be a scourge, mostly because of industrial waste and people, builders, traders dumping waste rather than disposing of it in the correct way. As a London Assembly team, there's two things that we would work to do. One is work with local authorities to increase that recycling rate, but use those influencing levers to do so. But secondly, London Labour and City will continue to oppose the development of new incinerators in London, and they are already in instance work to make sure they are functioning to environmental heat networks.
Okay, thank you. We're losing you in patches there, Krupesh, but just check if your internet is okay there. Anton, over to you on the recycling, particularly flats, fly tipping, and just generally getting more people to do better on recycling, please.
Great. I'd just like to pick up a point that Krupesh just stated. So the London Waste and Recycling Board actually have stated and shown that the Lib Dem authorities are in the top 5, Brent isn't anywhere near that in terms of recycling rates. And as I said in my introductory remarks, the increase in recycling on average across London is 1% over the last 5 years since Sadiq Khan's been mayor. So, I mean, that's pretty poor, and I think could be a lot better. And we are a lot more ambitious on recycling. Now, in terms of fly tipping and what we can do to actually resolve what is a huge problem. It's one of the biggest problems that I deal with in Alperton as a local councillor. And I don't just go to cleanups during an election. I go to cleanups throughout the year and have been going to cleanups for the last year, dealing with this problem, actually working with people on the ground. Now, you talked about volunteers and how you've seen over the last couple of months, particularly during the lockdowns, how people have gone out and actually actively sought to resolve this issue in their communities. And that's commendable. And that's something that I've been doing alongside lots of community groups within Alperton and wider across the borough too. I do think that what we need to do is actually not just enforcement. In my view, it's a three-step issue and a three-step plan. It's about enforcement, that's one step. It's about education as well. We need to change the culture of people, and some people have, unfortunately, there are people who will dump just because they feel that they can get away with it, and that's a big problem. And then there's also the third element of that, which is actually getting the stuff cleaned up quickly. I think Brent is far too slow on dealing with some of these issues. I can give countless examples of situations within Alperton and across the borough where roads are left with fly tips, huge amounts of rubbish left over long periods of time. And you can shake your head, Krupesh, but it doesn't end up being such a big pile of rubbish overnight. There are lots of people doing this across the borough, and actually what we need to be doing is we need to be better at working with other stakeholders and also volunteers to get this sorted. Brent Council, in my view, do not do enough on fly tipping. I mean, one of the big issues is when the charge was introduced on bulky waste, which saw an increase in the number of mattresses and second-hand furniture across our streets, as you know, in Duddon Hill as well. So one of the things that we need to be doing, and what I would do as your London Assembly member, is continuing to work with stakeholders across the board. The issue at the Welsh Harp, for example, which I referred to in my introductory remarks, that's a huge environmental disaster, not just for us as human beings, but for wildlife as well. It is a nature reservoir. It's somewhere where migrating birds come to breed. And unfortunately, what's happened over the last couple of weeks, as has been revealed when the Canal River Trust reduced water levels, is just the huge extent of dumping that has taken place over many, many years. That's something that could have and should have been dealt with much sooner. And actually, as your Assembly member, what I will be doing is working collectively, both with local authorities, so Brent and Harrow, but also stakeholders like the Canal River Trust, yourselves as Friends of the Earth, other volunteers, and others, the Environment Agency, to ensure that we get to grips with this issue.
Thank you, Anton. Emma, your thoughts on all of that, and in particular about recycling particularly from flats, the fly tipping, and how we can encourage people to respect their environments more. The one thing I would add to what Anton was saying, which he picked up on, about changing the culture and better enforcement and working with other stakeholders, the one thing I would add to that list is a big problem that we had last summer, where I was going around picking up the litter behind our park. Was there a lot of outside people coming to our parks, a lot of people out from outside Brent who come to our parks and leave their stuff, and that's another issue that is hard to address. But I'll come back to you on that, Anton. But Emma.
So our parks and nature reserves have seen a massive increase in use over the last year as we've had the pandemic, and we have been encouraged to go and exercise there. And we found that bins overflowing, we found fly tipping there. And one massive issue is that the council's budgets have been cut over 10 years due to austerity, and now there are not enough council street waste people coming or to parks to actually clean up the waste that we have. That's just one issue. There's also the culture of people now just leaving the waste and people bringing their home rubbish to parks. This is due to our actual recycling depots being shut because of COVID. So it's kind of a massive massive problem that has developed over the year, but it has been ongoing for a long time. And as mentioned about recycling, it has really flatlined over the last few years at 34%, whereas incineration has gone up to 63%. Incineration of our waste is incredibly polluting and environmentally damaging. So we need to make sure that we encourage recycling and that it is led through the London Assembly. And the Green Party have a zero waste strategy by 2030. So that's moving away from incineration and moving towards everything being recycled. And the councils need to do much better on that. And they need investment and backing to be able to do that. We've also pledged in the Green Party to have a habitat crime unit, which will work with the Met Police to ensure that fly tipping, people who fly tip are held to account for what they're doing, because there's no one left in councils to actually hold to account people who leave their waste on a large scale. So that is a big issue that definitely needs real thinking and investment behind it.
Thank you. I'm going to get you. I'm supposed to go to Krupesh, but I'm going to give you a very quick response, Anton, to any of that. Very brief, and then I'll move on.
Well, I just wanted to highlight the situation in our parks, because I think it's totally nonsensical that the council decided to get rid of bins in our parks, and the new policy.
Yeah, that's something that is really annoying me, by the way, Krupesh, and both of you, Anton. One thing that is really annoying me is the lack of bins in the parks.
I'm not in charge. I'd like to be, but I'm not in charge. Absolutely nonsensical of Brent Council to have removed rubbish bins in parks. You go to any local park on a sunny weekend and you end up seeing piles, as Emma said, piles of rubbish next to bins. So in my view, what we need to be seeing is we need to have a review of and seek a variation in Veolia's contract to either extend or get them to be collecting bins, collecting rubbish from the bins in parks. And that's something that I think needs to be done straight away. And it could be a very quick thing that we do. Seek Veolia's contract to ensure that.
Yeah, so I think it's very.
Hold on. Let Anton finish the sentence.
Let me finish. Yeah, more bins in our parks, but also more bins which were removed from residential streets as well. If we start to put bins back where people are dumping rubbish, I guarantee you'll see a reduction in fly tipping in Brent.
I really, Krupesh, I've been paying too much attention to all your answers, but one thing that really gets to me when I walk around my local park is the lack of bins, or lack of incredibly full bins that nobody clears quickly enough.
Yeah, so I think our parks have been used incredibly well, which is a good thing, obviously. But we do need to be better, I think, collectively as a society, to make sure that we encourage, when bins are full, people to be taken.
No, but it's not about society. I'm asking about the council. I'm concerned about the council and Viola. I'm not asking about human behaviour.
Yeah. So on that, I think if you look at the bins and the years of change that we've had at our parks, you'll hopefully have seen changes in the actual bins used as well, which encourage a split of recycling and household and non-recyclable waste as well, so that it's sorted and going in the right place. I think previously we had bins in parks which took all recycling and all waste, which just meant that recyclable waste was not recycled in parks as well. Where we feel we have hotspots, I think that the council does work hard to make sure that they review the bins in places, in parks and open spaces as well. What I will argue against is the bins on the streets as well, because what we found was that on bins on streets, people were fly tipping mattresses and large items around bins because it looked like it was a place where that was acceptable to keep rubbish as well. But if you look at the locations that had bins that don't have bins anymore, and look at the stats from the council over years, you'll probably see you will see that there's been a reduction in fly tipping on those hot areas.
I don't understand. I don't follow that. I mean, if you're putting a normal small bin on a street corner, are you saying that's a sign that says leave your mattresses here?
Yeah, so in the past, when there were bins on street corners, it tended to attract larger items of waste that were fly tipped around.
Really? Sorry, Anton, go on.
Could I please come in as a local councillor who's actually dealing with this issue on a day-to-day basis? This is total nonsense from Krupesh, unfortunately, because actually,
I think you'll have to.
I'll let you respond. I'll let you respond, Krupesh. Let him finish his thought. I'll let you respond.
Thanks. I just think that if we're not understanding the issues on the ground, I'm on the ground, I'm seeing these issues on a daily basis, just like you, Hashi. You're seeing on your street, on close by streets, the piles of rubbish that ends up on our local residential roads. And the fact of the matter is, the Labour Party and Brent have had many years to get to grips with this issue. Now we can blame austerity and we can talk about cuts, but ultimately there are mechanisms that could be put into use right now to deal with some of these issues. I'll give you one quick example. At the moment, there's an NSIL application open. So that's money that's been collected from developers, many of whom develop within my ward of Alperton in the Wembley area. There's a huge pot of money. And actually what's happening at the moment, our residents are bidding to try and resolve some of these issues and use some of that money available to resolve these issues that the council should be dealing with. Whilst at the same time, the council continue to park your council tax. Now, total nonsense to not tell the truth here, Krupesh.
Krupesh, I'm going to let Krupesh respond and then I'm going to go to Emma because Emma's waiting patiently. Krupesh.
Yeah, no, I think it's really, really easy to bash everything that goes wrong and protect the government's austerity program as Liberal Democrats have been doing for the last decade, really. And what Anton will not tell you is the truth about how the NSIL grant works, and that there are two sections of that NSIL grant. What he's talking about is two different pots of money and funding. And the current window that's open is for community and charity groups to bid to. There is a separate pot that does look at infrastructure in the wider.
But just let's not focus on the NSIL, Krupesh. Last question on this. I'm really interested in this because this is something that really bothers me. If you've got a park like Friant Country Park, like Gladstone Park, like Queen's Park, wherever it is, and you've got the bin, you don't have enough bins in the park to begin with, and the bins that you do have in the park are not emptied often enough, quickly enough, and sufficiently enough, what is Labour and the Labour Council going to do about that? It's as simple as that.
Yeah, so I can answer as a councillor rather than as a candidate for this election as well. But I think on that, I think we just need to be really increase how adaptive we are. The bins are there, but obviously all year round, not used the same way that they have been throughout the year. That's obviously weather dependent and season dependent. And during the last year, COVID dependent. They are now being used more than ever before.
Krupesh, come on, Krupesh. Krupesh, I'm going to interrupt you again. You're not being fair here. You're not answering the question. You're basically saying it's all about the behavior of people. So I'm going to move on. I don't think people can draw their conclusions. I'm going to give you a last sentence before I move on because I don't think we're getting anywhere on this.
So I will say it's about capacity of the parks and cleanup as well. If you've had significantly more people using the parks than in any year ever before, then obviously we'll need to adapt and councils will have to find.
I've been living in Brent for 20 years and I can tell you in the last 5 years, I've been going to my park, I've been having the same problem. It's not a COVID problem, I promise you. Emma, anything you want to say to that? But specifically, I was really interested what you said about the Habitats Crime Unit that you mentioned. There's a really interesting question here that talks about, if elected as our representative for Brent and Harrow, how will you protect mature trees, wildlife habitat along our borough's railway lines from being destroyed by TfL and its maintenance contractors? This is something that we've seen in particular around Preston Road, Kingsbury, and some of these areas. So that question and anything else that you've heard, I'm going to give you loads of time to respond because I've been focusing on these two guys for the last few minutes.
Thank you. So I'm so glad you asked this question. I am passionate about trees and particularly mature trees and how we need to preserve them. I've been really alarmed by the amount of trees that I've been seeing cut down over the last year in both Brent and Harrow. There have been seem to be massive tree felling operations by both TfL and the councils, and it really needs to stop because, as we've mentioned throughout the hustings so far, we are in a climate emergency and trees are a brilliant way way of mitigating against the worst effects of climate change. They cool the atmosphere, they provide a home for wildlife, they clean our air and help us breathe. So I can't think of many more important things than preserving our mature trees. And I'm saying mature trees because they are the sort of engine and lungs to our city. It's not new trees, which take a long time. Saplings often die, they're often not watered, and it's mature trees that we really need to preserve. About TfL, I have been leading a campaign on this, as I said in my opening statement, and trying to get TfL to change their practices. They have a vegetation management policy, which seems to be to remove everything along our tube line. We've got 55% of our tube line is above ground. So 10% of that is green land, which is a brilliant opportunity for us to protect our biodiversity within London City. As we know, we're losing green space all the time through developers building on it. So this TfL green land along our trackside is a perfect way of meeting our climate targets. And I, as someone who, if I got into the London Assembly, would lobby for the mayor to change, who oversees the TfL, change their practices of how they manage this vegetation and tree policies, because they're just basically removing everything in sight. And we've witnessed this in January. It's been very distressing for residents who've been talking to me about it. They've just cut everything in the path, removed habitat for animals to live. And we're talking about endangered animals as well, like hedgehogs and slow worms, which have been seen there. And also badger sets have been seen in this bit that has been completely cleared. So it really needs, policy needs to change in that area. And it's a really quite obvious and easy way for us to address the loss of green space in London.
Thank you very much. I'm going to move on to another topic now, which I think is also going to be, it has been touched upon previously by Krupesh in particular, and I want to really focus on it because I think this is something that will be a critical point for a lot of people, and I think it is related to the transport stuff in particular, but there are two questions. I'm going to bring them together, which is, one is, what plans do members of the GLA have to reduce air pollution in London, and also to make plans for each boroughs to have realistic arrangements for reaching this target? And within that, what is their perception of the pollution created by incinerators on London inhabitants? So I'll give you, Krupesh, your opportunity. We've talked about the transport in particular and the ULEZ and all that, but on air quality, you told that story of somebody who passed away, but Labour's been in power in Brent for as long as I can remember recently, and we know that the Mayor of London has been there for at least one term and possibly two. What is it that you're really going to do to fundamentally change the conversation around the air quality?
Yeah, so I've already spoken obviously about cars and ULEZ, so I'll try to touch on an area that I haven't probably mentioned as much.
Just to interrupt you, sorry, that people are struggling to hear you properly, Krupesh, so I don't know whether you want to bring your laptop a bit closer or speak a bit louder, but somebody had mentioned that actually in the questions that they were struggling to hear you.
Sure, so I'll try and raise my voice as well. So I think I've already spoken about ULEZ and cars, so I'll try and focus on an area that I haven't spoken on much, which is public transport and buses as well. So obviously there's a strong ambition to have a zero emission fleet in London. As your London Assembly member, I'll work with the Mayor to make sure that we bring targets closer and make sure that across Brent and Harrow, we have more hydrogen powered buses as well as electrical buses as well. As a kid, I used to take the 245 bus to school, and that was the first hydrogen powered bus route that was introduced in London. And I think it's right that if we're going to have policies across London which reduce the emissions of vehicles for ordinary residents, TfL should be leading by example and also making sure that it walks the walk on its own fleet and buses and tube as well.
Okay, Anton, on the air quality element that isn't necessarily dealing with the transport stuff that we've covered already?
Absolutely. Just before I do that, I just want to say that I totally agree with Emma on trees and mature trees and protecting our mature trees where we can. Just over the last few days, I've been in touch with Brent's tree officer regarding 2 mature trees. Unfortunately, one has now been cut down in Harleston, and I think that's absolutely tragic, considering that the mature trees have such a huge impact, huge positive impact on our air, and the saplings that are planted, you need to plant multiple saplings for that that positive impact to be felt.
Can you check on the mature tree in Brent in Wembley, actually, on the corner of the corner? There's one that is at risk right now that I'm trying to save, so I'll be in touch about that.
Please email me and I'll see what I can do. So specifically on air pollution, again, I think that the current Labour Mayor of London is not ambitious enough in seeking to address this issue. I mean, Sadiq Khan talks about ensuring that the whole of London's electric bus fleet is electric by 2037. I believe that at present only 4% is. So that is, we're quite a way behind. On what we would do as the London Liberal Democrats and what Louisa Porritt is saying as our mayoral candidate, obviously one of the big issues that we need to crack down on is the idling of vehicles. There was a fairly good campaign recently about idling and how impactful idling can be on contributing to toxic air, particularly around schools as well. So we're keen to crack down on idling of vehicles. The other thing that we're very keen to do, and it's something that we've been campaigning for a long while, is we've called it the red diesel taxation. And this basically relates to supermarket vehicles and lorries, which are often very polluting. They have 2 engines mostly, and there's a refrigeration engine as well. And they're not taxed. And at the moment, that's one of the reasons why our air is so bad in London, is that we have these lorries that are coming into our communities. And ultimately, if we were to impose this red diesel taxation, this, in my view, and in the view of the London Liberal Democrats, who've been campaigning for this for a long while, would be one way to do that. Ultimately, we also need to think about making sure that our taxis and vans go electric. Getting cars switched to electric is also important. But I really do think that the focus needs to be on buses, taxis and vans. And I do believe that Louisa Porritt and the Liberal Democrats have a much more ambitious plan on this. I mean, Louisa herself is an asthmatic, and her asthma has been severely impacted by the quality of air in London. And I do think that, referencing also what Krupesh said earlier about the young girl who lost her life as a consequence of bad air where she lived, you know, this is an issue that is literally killing people in our city. This is something that needs to be dealt with, and it needs to be dealt with in a much more ambitious way than the way in which I believe the current Labour Mayor of London is doing.
Thank you very much for that. To Emma now, just on that air quality point, and then I'll move on to the final question before we hear from you in terms of closing remarks.
Thank you. Yeah, I was actually going to talk about the girl Ella, who is actually, she lived in Lewisham, right next to the South Circular, and her mom has lobbied very hard to get her death certificate changed. So it's actually reported that she died because of the toxic air that she lived next to for her whole of her life. At 9 years old, she died. And it's been proved that it's nitrogen dioxide, which is from the buses that we have, the diesel buses. We've got 8,000 diesel buses running in London, which, as both candidates have said, we need to move from that to electric.
8,000, did you say? 8,000?
8,000 diesel buses, yeah. We need to move to diesel or hydrogen buses, and we need a network of those to make sure that our air is cleared. We need to stop building on green land. Both Harrow and Brent councils are constantly approving new buildings on green land, which is places where we could plant more trees, we could have wild meadows that are encouraging insects and allowing our nature to actually flourish in London, which we really, really need to do, as that contributes in a big way towards having clearer air within London. So, and also the 20 mph speed limit would mean that there's less emissions from cars driving at a slower speed, and also the low traffic neighbourhoods, making sure that there's less cars. So for a 2 km journey, try and encourage people to walk or cycle as opposed to drive those shorter journeys.
Perfect. Thank you very much for being brief. The last question before I move on to give you each a few minutes to close. And this is a controversial one about airport expansion. What will you try to do to convince Sadiq Khan that it is not a good idea to support any airport expansion anywhere until non-destructive aviation fuel is available? Krupesh first. What are you going to do to encourage your friend?
Yeah, so this is probably one where I disagree on the mayor on, simply because I think there's a big debate about airport expansion and where, if you like. So is it City? Is it Heathrow? Is it Gatwick? I think there's a step before that on whether, as you said, whether airport expansion is needed at all. So obviously, as London Assembly member, I would work with the mayor on that premise. But I also think that obviously the government has put out its report, which confirms the Heathrow expansion. Sadiq did fund the court case and joined in with the councils that were directly impacted on that issue. But I think there'll have to be a wider piece of work looking at if it is the case that airport expansion does go ahead, as the government seem like they will press ahead with. What else can we do? What about the journeys to Heathrow Airport? A lot of the traffic that is around our airports is about how people are actually getting there. So what can we do to improve public transport? We've got the Elizabeth line, obviously, which will go to Heathrow Airport as well. So once that battle has obviously got to a certain stage, we do need to start looking at what we can do to improve the air quality as much as possible, working with that policy.
Thank you for that. And to Anton, your views on stopping any airport expansion.
Well, I'm sure you won't be surprised to know that the Liberal Democrats are totally united in opposition to airport expansion in the southeast. We have long fought hard in the councils down where this would be the third runway at Heathrow would be located, to oppose that. We are totally united both at a local authority level, at an assembly level. Our mayor, as Louisa Porritt, would be united behind Louisa on that too. Our MPs have long fought this battle against the expansion and the third runway at Heathrow. We do not believe it. So I wouldn't need to go to Assembly Hall, the City Hall, to encourage my mayoral candidate to believe what I believe, because my mayoral candidate Louisa Porritt already believes it. We're against it.
Thank you very much. And Emma, I know I won't be surprised as to what you're going to say, but tell us.
I was going to say, yeah, surprisingly, the Green Party are against any airport expansion anywhere in the country, especially against a third runway in Heathrow, which is completely nonsensical. Our current government are saying that they want a green future for the country. There is no way that is possible if you build another runway in Heathrow Airport. Also, with City Airport, Sian Berry has pledged that she would actually stop that airport and it would become council housing. She would build on it rather than have it as an airport. So we need to take less flights if we're serious about addressing the climate emergency.
I'm going to stop you there, Anton, because I think we're going to try and go towards the closing thoughts now. I'm going to give each of you the opportunity to sum up your thoughts, and you have 4 minutes, and Elaine is going to police that 4 minutes for me. And then we're going to then have that poll that we had from before to give the audience members who might have joined us later a heads up on this. We had a poll to ask members who are joining us on this webinar how they would have voted, and they voted anonymously, and we had 54% said Labour, 46% said Green, and then Lib Dems and the Conservatives had 4% each. And we're going to do the same poll after the closing remarks to see if anything has changed.
Sorry, Hashi, can I just ask you?
Yes.
Because we said we would finish about 9, up to 9. So if you wanted,
I'm just looking. I'm happy to carry on, Ian, but the issue I have is I have run out of the questions that you had sent me.
Oh, right.
And actually, Elaine might have some more questions.
Yeah.
And so why don't we move on to Elaine's questions before we do the summing up? And I mean, Ian, my view is always that if we said we would finish at 9, doesn't mean we have to actually finish at 9.
True.
It is sometimes possible and better to finish while you're ahead.
Yeah.
So why don't we take the questions that Elaine has, and then we'll do the summing up, the polling, and then the closings from the organisers, because I think it is already 8:30 on a Wednesday evening. I don't know to what extent we're holding up other people. So Elaine, over to you.
Okay, so I've kept an eye on the chat and the questions that have come in, and I'll just try and pick some that we haven't really covered. One of them was about making sure that young people are at the heart of your strategy. How will you make sure young people are at the heart of your strategy? And how will your proposed plans create jobs for Brent and Harrow?
Anton first, as the self-declared young person.
So young people are always at the heart of my strategy, because I myself am a young person, but I say that because actually, as I said at the beginning, this issue is really, really important. The issue of the climate emergency and the environmental disaster that we're facing will have the most impact on my life and the lives of my children and grandchildren. And I know Krupesh is a dad as well, so he's got his daughter. So this is a big issue for young people. And having a voice from City Hall and me being your voice at City Hall would mean that I would be a voice for the young people of Brent and Harrow. I hope that over the last year, I've proved that even as a single Lib Dem councillor in the Civic Centre, I've been able to overuse my voice and make sure that my voice is heard by the administration, but also by the council officers to actually get things done for Alfreton and for Brent. If I were in the Civic, and if I were in City Hall in the London Assembly as your GLA member, I would again seek to use what I believe to be my strong voice to be a champion for young people. On the specifics of jobs, I spoke briefly in my introductory remarks about Louisa's plan for jobs. I mean, in a post-pandemic, post-COVID world, we're going to have to rethink how we work and what jobs will be available to people. And I do think that we have an ambitious plan on making sure that we have green, sustainable jobs into the future. And actually, another thing that I'm really proud of the Liberal Democrats on is the fact that we've always encouraged and been at the forefront of the pursuit to encourage apprenticeships across London and across the country. And that's something that I know Louisa has spoken about very clearly. If she were mayor, she would encourage apprenticeships and encourage young people across, and I, as the GLA member, would encourage young people in Brent and Harrow, not just to look at studies in university, but also to think about apprenticeships as a way to work and a way to getting a job.
Thank you. To Emma.
Thank you. That's a great question. Sian Berry has done so much for young people and has a lot of pledges to support young people in London. She won £45 million for youth clubs, which have been severely cut in London. So she has invested and made sure that young people are really remembered within the City Hall and policies there. She's also campaigned for £14 per hour London living wage for people in London, which would really help young people who are undergoing a massive unemployment problem in London, especially since COVID. And there's also the fact that she's standing up for renters' rights. So obviously young people are more likely to be renting in London, and she's got some really strong policies around making sure that rents are affordable within London, as London has one of the most expensive places to rent out of all the major cities in the world.
Rupesh, same question about young people at the heart of your strategy, and over to you.
Thanks. So I'll start with the latter part of it first. So on jobs, obviously I've already mentioned quite extensively about the Green New Deal, which is already started by Sadiq Khan in London, supporting the communities and those that have been affected most by COVID-19. The first phase of funding obviously will support and fund 1,000 jobs this year, and the Green New Deal will hope to support a further 175,000 jobs in the long term. There's only one candidate at this election which is focusing on jobs and green jobs in a way that others are not. On young people, if elected as your London Assembly member, I will set up Brent and Harrow's first ever Young People's Steering Group. That steering group will be modelled on a similar group that I set up as part of the Lead for the Borough of Culture, called the Young Ambassadors, who were later moved on to be the Blueprint Collective. The idea of this group, it will be a reference group that will take decisions and look at policies, from local council policies to the mayor's policies to even government policies, and hopefully have them engaged in decision making in a way they haven't been before. My aim for this group is to have members of the community. So I've already been going out speaking to community groups, places of faith, residents associations, and letting them know about this, about the policy, but also asking them to nominate young people from their community. So it's a true group that is representative of all communities across Brent and Harrow.
Thank you very much. Elaine, please offer us another question.
Okay, so this is one from me, actually. I think of Brent as the borough of cultures, obviously, and London as a borough of cultures as well. How can Brent and Harrow and London take the lead in global climate justice, particularly in very ambitious plans to make a fair contribution to climate mitigation?
Same order again, this time Anton, please.
I mean, if you look at a capital city in Europe, Paris, and you look at what the mayor of Paris has been able to do in leading the way on dealing with the climate crisis within Paris, encouraging cycling, greening Paris. If you look at Vienna as well, a city that I stayed in for a period of time a few years ago, again, another city at the forefront of the fight to make sure that we are addressing the climate emergency. Unfortunately, that's not the case in London at the moment. We've had a mayor for the last 5 years who has not been at the forefront. I mean, he has not been on the world stage promoting London, promoting the fact that we should be at the top of that list and making sure that we deal with issues related to the climate emergency, and making sure the ambitious plans that Louisa Porritt and the Liberal Democrats have, in my view, will put us up there fighting the climate change emergency on the global stage, and making sure that we collectively work together. This is one of the reasons actually why I'm so passionately pro-European as well. And it's unfortunate that, and it's tragic that we've left the European Union now, but actually this is a global fight. It's something that we need to be doing with our European friends and neighbors, with others around the world. And actually, I do not think that's what's been happening over the last 5 years. So what we need to be seeing is a former MEP in Louisa Porritt who knows how to work with others around Europe and others around the world, getting things done and tackling climate change together.
Krupesh, I saw you shaking your head, and I hope you have a response to that.
Yeah, I think it was just about criticising the mayor not for taking a global role. If there's any mayor of London in the history of the role that's taken a global role, it's this one. And I think just the example on divestment, for example, so over Sadiq's term, we've seen the London Pension Funds Authority investments in extractive fossil fuels reduced by over 90%, down to just 0.06% of assets. Sadiq has used that example and taken it to other countries as well, and other mayors as well. I think in terms of that example of divestment, he's worked with with New York even to lead the C40 network of cities from all divesting in fossil fuels. We've got the London is Open campaign, which is the most global campaign any mayor of London has done to attract investment and also make sure that people from whichever community they're from feel welcome in our global city.
Thank you. I think Emma has a direct response to that as well.
Yeah, I'd like to say something about divestment of pensions from fossil fuels, because yesterday Divest Brent presented their petition to Brent Council asking them to divest pensions from fossil fuels, and it was declined. So Labour in Brent has not actually acted on that. I mean, it's so important that that happens, and it's really great that Divest Brent managed to get within the climate change strategy in Brent an actual section on pensions. So it definitely needs to be a whole scale thing that happens within London. I'd just like to say, if you want green, you need to vote green, and we have the greenest policies, and we would like London to be the greenest city, and I fully agree that this is a global issue and we all need to work together.
Thank you very much. We'll have one final question, I think, from Elaine.
Okay, I'm trying to choose between bees and incinerators. So, okay, I think we'll do the kind of positive one.
Yes, let's do something uplifting.
Yeah, I'm sure there'll be uplifting answers. So the bee population is declining. How are you going to make London a bee-friendly city?
Well, let's start with Emma on that one.
Thank you, that's a great question. We would ban pesticides in London, so that would encourage insects to flourish. At the moment, there is not a policy. Sian Berry has pledged that she would ban any pesticide use on any city hall land and also any TfL land, because at the moment TfL is still using chemical pesticides. Sian Berry also has a brilliant policy, which is to rewild bus shelters, so the roofs would be bee friendly and encourage them and give them space to actually thrive. And within Harrow we have some brilliant local groups working on rewilding parts of parks and recreation grounds. So I think we need to make sure that there's proper funding for that to happen, and there's space for our insects and particularly bees, which are so important to our whole biodiversity to flourish.
Thank you. To Anton, please.
Absolutely. Bees are so important to biodiversity, to the way in which we exist. Without bees, a lot of, we wouldn't exist. There was a Netflix documentary recently that I watched all about this topic, and it's absolutely incredible how such a small insect has such a monumental impact on all of us. So in terms of what the Liberal Democrats and Louisa Porritt would do to encourage bees and to make sure that we see an increase in the population, which is sadly declining. Rewilding London, something I've spoken about before, and obviously Emma mentioned rewilding bus stops, but what we want to see is we want to be rewilding everywhere possible. We want to see green roofs as well. So currently the plan that Louisa Porritt and the Liberal Democrats have is to ensure that building blocks and offices have green roofs to encourage wildlife and in turn bees, but rewilding London with walks where possible, that's something that I'm passionate about. Before I got involved in the political arena, if that's the way to put it, I'm passionate about animals, and I actually wanted to be a vet. So it's something that's very personal to me as well. So if I were fortunate enough to be elected on the May the 6th, this is an issue that I would take to City Hall to ensure that we get an increase in the population of bees, but also to look after the whole of our biodiversity, to look after our native and migrating species that come to London as well. So many species come to London and call London home too. And it's something that we need to be better at making sure we look after those green protected spaces, like, for example, the Welsh Harp, that is at the moment in a catastrophic situation.
Thank you. And I also want to just acknowledge that we have somebody from the Animal Party who was going to take part, but who's very keen on all the issues to do with animals. Krupesh, your thoughts on that, on the bees. I just thought I'd mention a couple of comments from the comments. I think Debbie Nyman saying that Row Green Village is having a trial period without pesticides. Another comment from Pam Lawrence saying that bees are very, very important. Not just bees, but many other insects are also involved in the pollination as well as part of the food chain, especially for birds. We need more rewilding. So your points, Krupesh.
Yeah, no, completely. I can completely agree with the points, and some of the points the other candidates have made as well, especially on the greening of bus shelters. That's something Sadiq has put in his manifesto as well for London for these elections as well. Also, I think on biodiversity, both Labour councils in Brent and Harrow have been supportive, and Brent got quite a lot of coverage a couple of years ago for the introduction of bee corridors. One thing that I will do in addition as your London Assembly member is work with community groups and the Bee Friendly Trust to develop, like we have seen on Sudbury Town Station, planting to encourage bee life within tube stations themselves. For those that have space to have planters, Willesden Green's a good example as well. I will support and promote and work with TfL to make sure that those accesses and those routes and the projects are supported through those tube stations as well. So it's not just about our parks and green spaces, greening wherever possible.
Pam's pointing out that if you did have bee-friendly bus shelters, that might put people off going on the buses. So that's something to look out for. Right, I'm going to now invite the closing submissions or points. Each panelist has 4 minutes, and a reminder of the poll that we had from before, which was that 54% of you said you would vote Labour, 46% of you said you would vote Green, and 4% each for the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives. And so after this, we hope that people might have been better informed and might then give us an indication of how they vote. And the vote, and of course the poll is completely anonymous, and you'll have an opportunity to vote at the very end. Now, in reverse order to the opening, I'm going to first invite Krupesh, and you have 4 minutes that will be policed by the very capable Elaine, and your time starts now.
Thank you for inviting me and listening to me today. Today, the Tory candidate for the Mayor of London launched his video campaign, and I'd recommend you would watch it if you haven't already. In it, he drives from Romford to central London, first of all in his ULEZ compliant car, criticising car charges that drivers of gas guzzling vehicles have to pay in order to get to the centre of London by car. He travels on his own on a journey that could be conducted on a single train line. This tells you everything you need to know about this election. If you want a greener London, the choice is absolutely clear. Not only do I talk the talk, I walk the walk. 3 years ago, I took the Veganuary challenge and have been vegan ever since. Changing your dietary and eating habits are the biggest single thing that people can do to improve the climate and improve the environment. I walk the walk by taking personal actions because I want to leave behind a better planet than the one that I came into for my children. This election is a 2-horse race between me and the Tory candidate who hasn't shown up today, and for a better environment. Use all your votes for Labour at this election. If you are a Green Party or Lib Dem member or activist, consider lending your vote or second preference to Sadiq Khan and to me in Brent and Harrow, and do not take the risk of waking up on May the 7th with an Assembly member and a Mayor who simply do not share our values.
Thank you, Krupesh. And Emma, your closing thoughts, 4 minutes.
So thank you to Brent FoE for holding this hustings. Hopefully tonight you have seen that Green candidates for Mayor and Assembly have the plans to transform London. We've got fresh thinking for housing, a clear plan to keep London moving, a mission to transform our economy, action for a safe and healthy city, and plans to create the greenest city in the world, with no third runway and no Silvertown tunnel to make things worse. As the Green Party GLA candidate, I will be a strong voice for Brent and Harrow, standing up for local concerns and pressing for changes both locally and London-wide. I care passionately about social justice, public services, the environment, and the wildlife that we share our planet with. I would make sure that all these interconnected issues are represented at the London Assembly and we push for real change. It is the Greens who have the vision and plans to change London and create the greenest city in the world, one that is best prepared for the future. The upcoming London elections have a fairer voting system and your vote really matters. There are 3 opportunities to vote Green on 3 separate ballot papers for your London Mayor, Sean Berry, the London Assembly list candidate, and for your Brent and Harrow candidate. And I encourage you to vote Green on all 3 this May the 6th. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Emma. Somebody in the chat also asking what's the reason for the absence of the Conservative candidate. The answer is that we had reached out to her and her people through various channels and did not get a response until yesterday, and were told that it was too short notice for her. But we did everything we possibly could to invite her, but she is not here. Now, Anton, the floor is yours for your closing remarks.
Well, thank you. And thank you to Brent, Friends of the Earth, for organising today. Again, it's been lovely to spend the evening with fellow candidates, Krupesh and Emma. I don't think we've ever met Emma before, so it was nice to meet you. A year ago, I was elected in an election, in a by-election in Alperton that no one thought I could win. For the last year, I've spent every single day representing the residents of Alperton and doing my best for them, speaking up for them at the Civic Centre, but also getting action on their streets and on their roads. If I were fortunate enough to be elected as your Brent and Harrow GLA member on the 6th of May, I'd do exactly the same. I've spent the last year using my voice, my single voice in the Civic Centre, to speak up for people who have felt neglected and ignored for far too long. I hope that over the course of this evening, I have put forward Louisa Porritt's and the Liberal Democrats' ambitious, radical, green plans to make our city much better and recover after what has been a really difficult time for all of us. I don't have to say it here, but I know that you all know this has been the COVID crisis, the COVID epidemic has hit Brent and Harrow particularly hard. And I've witnessed that firsthand. We need to put recovery first. We need to elect a mayor on the 6th of May who has a plan on jobs, on affordable homes, and on cleaning our air. Those are 3 clear ambitions that Louisa Porritt and the Liberal Democrats have on the 6th of May. Now, I think that the narrative that has been espoused by another candidate regarding the 2-horse race and that this election is between one party or the other is totally false. Please don't be fooled by the fact that this particular election has a fair voting system, which I fundamentally believe we should be using in every single election. But this election has a fair voting system. And the last time we used a similar voting system in London, the Liberal Democrats topped the poll. We elected 3 MEPs. One of them was Louisa Porritt, our candidate for mayor. Now, I'm fortunate enough to know Louisa very well. She's a friend and she's a colleague. And I can say wholeheartedly, with my hands on my heart, she would be a mayor that would put you first and make sure that we recover well from the pandemic and deal with the climate emergency that we've spent the evening talking about. On the 6th of May, you have the opportunity to vote with your heart and for that vote to actually count. Vote Liberal Democrat on all 3 ballots on May the 6th, and we will make sure that if elected, and if I'm elected, I'll make sure that green issues and addressing the climate emergency and all the issues we've discussed tonight are at the heart of what I do as your member of the London Assembly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elaine. Sorry, Elaine. Thank you very much, Anton. And Elaine, now, can we have the poll either through you or...
Yeah, I think Ian is
Yeah.
doing that.
Ian is
I'm
sorting
doing
out.
that.
Somebody's also trying to correct my maths in the chat. Pam is on it.
Yeah.
Maybe I've got the figures wrong from the
No,
previous one.
no. Can I explain? You
Yes.
have got it right. You were right in the numbers that you gave, but I think there are rounding up errors. So the numbers of people voting are correct, but the percentages are not, don't work out exactly right, and this may happen again. So I'm going to launch the poll once again, and if you'd like to vote on that.
Thank you very much. Please make your votes now. Thank you. Did I missed that? I missed the final results there. What were those results?
Okay, so the final result is Labour 26%, Green now 57, Lib Dem 17, and Conservative 0.
So Green is 57 and Labour 26 and the Lib Dems 17. So what we have there is after the session, Labour has lost half its share of votes. The Greens have gone up by about 10 percentage points, and the Lib Dems have tripled their votes essentially. So not a bad result for the Lib Dems and for the Greens, and commiserations, Krupesh.
But I think as is fairly apparent, it's not a scientific
science, no.
poll, and it's possible for people to game the system in one way or another. So I don't think anybody should take it entirely seriously.
No. Of course, we shouldn't take it entirely seriously. I'll just say a very few concluding thoughts, and I'll hand over to Lucy, Elaine, and Ian. Thank you very much to everyone for joining us this evening and this brilliant joint Brent Friends of the Earth and London Assembly candidates. Thank you to Emma, to Anton, and to Krupesh for your thoughts, for your passion. A lot is often said about people in public life who are in politics and who are not representing us. And what I would say is that despite the exchanges we've had today, you know, I really, really want to say we appreciate the fact that you're putting your head above the parapet. We may not agree on everything. We may not see eye to eye on various issues, but at least you're putting your head above the parapet and you want to represent our community. You live amongst us. You're one of us. So thank you so much for everything. And you know, we hope that you will continue to stay engaged in these issues, no matter what the results are. And the election is on the May the 6th, everyone. Please make sure you vote and take part. Thank you to Elaine, and thank you to Lucy. Thank you to Ian for organizing this. This is in your free time, you know, doing this and making this happen. So, and thank you for asking me to chair it. And I hope to see you all soon in person somewhere, somehow. So thank you. I'll stop there and I'll hand over to Elaine and to...
Well, can I just say thank you very much, Hashi, for running this so smoothly and well, and putting hard questions sometimes and strong questions and rephrasing things, and being able to run this in a way I think that will have been very useful for people making their making their decisions on May the 6th. So, and thank you for giving up your time to help us as well. And thank you to all the candidates who've been very, very, who've taken part in such a positive way. Thank you. Okay.
Do you want to say anything, Lucy, from Brent Friends of the Earth,
Yep.
or shall I?
You go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say to people, just, do join us. Join our, if you can't get to meetings, fine, but you join our mailing list, and then you'll get to hear about these activities like this that we're running. And obviously we're looking forward to being out more, because we need to gather people together, really broad coalition of people to increase the pressure for us to be more ambitious about reducing the impact of climate change.
And we meet once a month on the second Tuesday of the month. The next meeting of Brent Friends of the Earth is on next Tuesday, April the 13th. If you want to get notification of meetings, go to brentfoe.com and you'll be put on our mailing list and can attend meetings on Zoom at the moment.
Just go to Brent Friends of the Earth on their
Yeah,
website.
I've just put the link to join. So if you email info@brent.com,
Brent FoE.
let me just rewrite that, brentfo.com, then you should be able, Pam will or somebody will email you the details of the Zoom link to join our meeting. So info@brentfoe.com.
Okay, or www.brentfoe.com, or just Google Brent Friends of the Earth. Yeah. Okay, let's close the meeting. Thanks everybody, and hope to see you before too long. I'm waving, but my thing's turned off. Okay, bye all.